Hello, it's David with Ural Motorcycles. This week we're going to go over something that's pretty simple actually, but reading the owner's manual, it can seem like it's a little bit more difficult than it actually is. So this was asked for probably over a month ago by a YouTube user named Lone Star who has a 2019. So we're going to go over how to adjust the parking brake. Like I said, it's pretty simple, pretty quick. And then I'm going to go out in the back of the warehouse and I'm going to talk about brake bias adjustment on any bike from 2014 and newer when the bikes went to three-wheel disc brakes. The bike I'm using today to demonstrate the parking brake adjustment is a 2020 Woodland Camo Gear Up. And as you can see, it's got the parking brake lever up on the handlebar. Now this has been true since 2017 through current model year. The 2014 through 16, the first generation of three-wheel disc brakes, those had a parking brake actuation lever that was down on the right-hand side by your leg. That was replaced in 2017 with a more intuitive, easier to reach lever that was mounted up on the handlebars. Although this procedure is specifically for 17 through 20 model years, the basic ideas that I'm going to show you will also help you adjust the parking brake on your 2014 through 16. Just keep in mind that there's a few differences, like where the adjuster on the cable is located and where the lever is. But the basic setup on the caliper primarily is going to be the same for both of those generations. So what I've done here is I've intentionally run the adjuster in so there's as much slack on the inner cable as possible up at the top here. And then down below, I've also closed up the adjuster so the cable slack is as long as possible. So doing that, when I apply the parking brake lever up here, you can see I can still move the bike back and forth. There's nothing binding the rear rotor. So to perform this adjustment, you're going to need a 5/8 wrench or socket and two 10mm wrenches for the cable. What you're going to want to do is start with the handlebar mounted actuating lever in the off position, and then you're going to remove this 5/8 nut that secures this arm here on the caliper. Now once you've removed the nut, you can slide the arm off and it'll just hang to the side. So what's going on in here under this boot, there's actually a mechanical worm drive that goes in and out. Counterclockwise brings it out, clockwise pushes it in. And what that's doing is it's actually putting pressure on the brake pads to clamp the rotor and lock it in place when this arm actuates that last little movement. So like I said, turning it in clockwise, you can run it down until you can feel it stop. Now that's the worm drive putting pressure on the brake pad and actually coming to rest on the rotor. So if you turn it all the way in and you put the arm back on, it's going to rub and end up heating up your rotor, warping it, boiling the fluid out of the caliper, and destroying your pads in a very short amount of time. So to start, we're going to take this worm drive, mechanical worm drive, and turn it clockwise in until it stops. Then what we're going to do is we're going to back it off 1 or 2 splines, which equates to about 1 millimeter to 2 millimeters on the other side where the brake pad is against the rotor. So we're going to back it off just 1 or 2 splines. Now that gives it enough clearance that when the parking brake is not active, it allows the wheel to spin freely and allows the hydraulic part of the brake caliper to activate when you press your brake pedal. So with this backed off 1 or 2 splines, you're now going to take your arm and slide it over the splines while keeping this as close to this little backstop as possible. without actually moving this any further in either direction. Take your nut and tighten it back on the caliper. So we've got the parking brake arm on the caliper where it needs to be with the appropriate clearance so it doesn't damage the rotor pads or the caliper or decrease your braking ability. And you can see up here we still have the adjuster turned all the way in. Now, the adjustment here and the adjustment on the cable is, you can do either or. This one's actually a little redundant. You don't really have to mess with this one, but you can see without it activated how much slop is in the handle here. So we're going to use the lower adjustment on the cable to take out some of the slop. Now here's where your two 10mm wrenches come into play. You place one on the adjuster body and one on the ferrule on the cable housing, and then you're going to simply open it up, which is in effect shortening the distance of the inner cable against the two end points. So you're going to take out a little bit of the slack here on this adjuster so this doesn't flop around. Now it's still going to be loose initially until you activate the lever hard, and then it'll lock the parking brake in place. But you don't want to take out all the slack, because if you do remove all the movement up here on this is going to be too tight, and you run the risk of dragging your brakes unintentionally. Even though the parking brake looks like it's off, it could be dragging the brakes on the rear. Now, to confirm you got the proper adjustment, you're going to want to lift this up on its center stand and then spin the wheel with the parking brake off. You want it to spin freely without an audible drag between the rotors and the pads. Taking it down off the center stand, with the parking brake applied, it should also be immovable. Taking it off rolls freely. Now, if you've got it where the wheel spins freely without audible drag, and when it's activated you can't move the bike, you've got it where you need it, then you can take your two 10mm wrenches again and just snug up the lock nut against the adjuster. Now, in the future, as your pads bed in, say you do a brake pad change, after the first couple hundred miles, they're going to bed in or wear in against the rotor. Incremental adjustments can be made right here, but if it gets to the point where you're at the end of the lifespan of the brake pads and it's not holding anymore, but you haven't had time to replace them or get them replaced yet, you can make another larger adjustment here on the worm drive. Just remember to back everything off, make the adjustment here first, and then go back to your incremental adjustment here. And right now we're going to take you out back, and I'm going to show you how to adjust the bias between the sidecar and the bike so the bike stops straight and handles appropriately under braking. Now I'd like to talk about some other periodic adjustments that might need to be made to your motorcycle as time goes by and more mileage is accumulated on the bike. Because of the fact that Ural has brakes on all three wheels, we want to make sure that the sidecar and the bike brake bias is adjusted properly to ensure the best handling under braking. Now on the front brake, there's not really much to do except basic maintenance. You want to make sure that you have good pads. You want to make sure that your rotor is within specifications for the thickness of the rotor, and you want to make sure that you always have good fluid at the proper level that's properly bled. For the rear of the bike and the sidecar, you want to have those same things. You want to make sure you have good rotors, good pads, proper fluid levels with the proper bleeding. But you also want to make sure that the brake bias between the bike and the sidecar is appropriately adjusted. For example, if the sidecar brake is too loose, when you apply the front brake with your hand and the rear brake with your foot, if the bike is stopping adequately, but the sidecar is loose, the sidecar is going to want to run around the front of the bike, and it's going to cause it to want to go to the left. Additionally, if the sidecar brake was too tight, when you apply the brakes to the motorcycle, the sidecar brake is going to want to lock up, and it's going to want to drag behind the bike, making the bike veer to the right. For the rear brake, you want to ensure that your activating arm that goes into the piston in the master cylinder has about 1 to 2 millimeters of free play. There's a couple reasons for this. One, if you were had your foot on the brake and maybe you were pressing down a little bit with your boot and you didn't know it, you could be building pressure in here, and one of two things would happen. You would be dragging the rear brake and causing heat and distortion on the rotor and wear down your pads, possibly boiling out the fluid in the process. And also, we use a hydraulic brake switch now. So if this was activating the piston, building pressure on the switch, your rear brake light will stay on while you're riding down the road. So like I said, you just want to make sure you have 1 to 2 millimeters of free play in here, back and forth. You don't want it to be right on the piston cup. And if that's what you have, great, you can move on to the next step. Now on the sidecar side, you have a second master cylinder that is tied together with the foot brake through a mechanical link. So when you press the foot brake, it activates both the rear brake and the sidecar brake simultaneously. So the bias can be adjusted by taking a 4 millimeter hex key and removing the two 6 millimeter screws. Once you got those removed, take the screws and the plate and put them aside for reinstallation later. Now you're going to want to take two 10 millimeter wrenches, and you're going to break the jam nut and run it back far enough that you have some adjustment room. Now what we're going to do for this demonstration is I'm going to run this all the way back towards the back of the motorcycle, away from the piston. What that's going to do is loosen or lighten the braking on the sidecar side. So what I'm going to demonstrate here is I'm going to get up to 5, 6, 7 miles an hour, and I'm going to apply only the foot brake. And with the master cylinder on the sidecar backed all the way off, you'll be able to see the reaction of how the bike handles with improper braking on the sidecar. Now I'm going to do the same thing with it turned in quite a bit to show you how it reacts when it's too tight. So after a couple of test runs and a little adjustment, I've got the rod adjusted properly to activate the piston at the appropriate time, so the bias between the sidecar and the bike is correct. So on this run, I'm going to show you what it looks like when the bike stops appropriately, just using the foot brake. Once you have your rod adjusted appropriately, you can spin down the lock nut, take your two 10 millimeter wrenches, and just give it a little, snug it up a little bit so it locks it in place. And you'll take your cover and your 6 millimeter screws get those started and tighten in place. So that's it for this video. We really appreciate all the comments, as I've said before. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. On Facebook, give us a like. We've been getting so many great comments, a few negative ones, or I don't know if they're trolls or what, but you got to keep in mind that what we're doing here is after hours or in between other jobs. So we just really wanted to reach out personally from Ural headquarters to talk to you directly, even if it's through video. And then I've been trying to answer as many of the questions that come in as possible. I know I've missed some, but we will get to everything we can. And then as far as the videos that you'd like to see, I'm still making a list. I'm adding to it weekly, and we will get to those videos that you've requested as time permits. But like I said, this is kind of like a secondary thing for us, aside from running Ural headquarters in Redmond, Washington. So yeah, bear with us, and we'll get to everything in time. We really appreciate you as a Ural customer, and we do appreciate you watching these videos. So we'll talk to you next time. Thank you.